Good evening and welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a show where we bring you a conversation of ideas, dialogues on issues that have disappeared from political and media discourses. Joining us tonight on our focus on the art of giving. We live today in an increasingly unequal society. How do India's rich reach across the divide? How do we maximize impact? Joining me tonight, women and men who are all making a huge difference, yet in different ways with very different perspectives. Joining me tonight, Rohini Nilekani, Zarina Screwwala, Nikhil Dey and Anshu Gupta. Thank you all very much for coming in. Rohini, in a sense, you made philanthropy headline news again a few months ago when you gave almost 164 crores worth of your personal wealth and dedicated to the cause of governance in a sense. Why did you think this was so important and also to make such a huge personal commitment?
Well, I've been active in this space for more than 15 years now. So it is just a continuum of the work that I've been doing. And it was planned. And I reached a stage where I felt now I was thinking ahead, had a strategy about where I would want to give next. And areas like governance, it won't be only governance, seem logical in looking at what's happening in the country today, and also because there are many new organizations and people who are doing some really innovative things on the ground that need support. And we hope that this kind of then snowballs into something bigger. So,
how do you bring your personal commitment and supporting of certain causes, some of them which include governance? How have you judged in the last 15 years the issue of impact? What are the areas in which you think a person or an individual, even an individual of who can bring wealth to the table, can make a difference sometimes when there's so many problems around you?
Right. So there are different ways. I mean, because philanthropy, if you're talking about philanthropy, is entirely voluntary and depends very much on the interests of the donor. So there's no one recipe for this. In my case, I'm not very rigid about measurement of impact because I think some things have good in themselves. So, for example, in Argyam, we work on water. One is that physically you're developing some physical water infrastructure. But more interesting to us is when we are able to galvanize communities and build up the quality of demand of citizens on the supply side, so that then you have universal access to clean water. You try to get involved in the question of why are our water resources depleting or getting polluted. For us, when citizens begin to engage, we find they find their own solutions. It's not like you have to go there with some chapa of a solution and say, do this. So for me, impact is when people start to internalize the locus of control. And that's easy. It's, there are no easy metrics for that, but there are some proxies. And we do look, obviously, to make sure that the money is not ill spent.
Nikhil, in a sense, you come from a completely different perspective because you're immersed full time in the world of, say, socio-political activism. You were a lawyer, gave it up and decided to go into this full time. When you look at philanthropy and how it can impact, because often you deal entirely with the government sector, why is there not more engagement with, say, the corporate sector or individuals in the private sector to come into issues that you deal with, some of them common issues and some of them different?
Yeah, I think it's very good you've asked the question the way you have, because the reason I do the work I do and the reason I've chosen this kind of path is because there are many of us who believe that you cannot divorce money and its impact from politics. You cannot certainly divorce it from ethics, and I think there'll be agreement all around. But you also can't divorce it from politics because the two questions are related. So a whole range of questions come up related to that. Where does the money come from? What is the politics of that money in its use? Because even though people may say they don't have a politics to it, actually how you are from charity on the one end to policy and what kinds of policy should come about at the other end, money is playing a role. We recognize that, we state it, we state our politics vis-a-vis. And finally, philanthropy is certainly private use of private resources for a public good. But if we want to, in a country like India, meet basic necessities, then one has to at all times keep an eye on what is happening with public resources for public good, because that's where you can get water or you can get schooling or health or employment, and much, much larger in scale. I mean, today when we are talking about right to food delivering 1,25,000 crores, that's something no private body can ever even aim or aspire to do. So that's where the policies of the country are concentrated. Now, in that, philanthropy plays a role. But I think there's a question that one needs to think about, which is part of our whole thing in money. I have deep respect for all the people who are sitting here. And I think people like Rohini, who've given resources the way she has, with a lot of thought behind it, is important. But for us, the questions also arise that why do we in our country not have money available for everyone as a right? Money meaning resources, for water, for health, for education, for food, which other countries around the world have. Why is it that so much wealth is accumulating with some and not accumulating with people who are working in this country to contribute towards the economy? Why do we have a tax to GDP ratio which is so much lower than across the world? And can a CSR small tax compensate for the fact that we are not putting enough resources? Today there's this huge debate that's taking place, can the country afford a Right to Food Act? But the fact is that if you look at, can we afford education, can we afford health, can we afford a Right to Health Act? The fact is that we have a GDP that has grown, and in that period we haven't put across resources of that kind of sum of money for our basic necessities within this country. So we have aimed in our efforts to say that there must be a kind of equality. You started off with talking about an unequal India. So there must be an equality in the way policies are. So our efforts go towards saying that we have a politics. Our politics is on the side of the poor being able to have equal opportunity. Equality is a step further, but at least equal opportunity, just as opportunity everyone else has had. We feel that philanthropy is important, but it's important in that then also to be watched. Because what impact is it having, not just in terms of metrics, but what impact is it having in terms of finally affecting the policy of this country?
No, I agree with that. That one is a real question in this country is how wealth is getting created and why value is accumulating so narrowly, you know. That of course is a very big question, but and I think philanthropy has a very limited role. It should have only a limited role. There are other people and institutions that need to have a bigger role, the public sector, citizen sector. So it should have a limited role. Having said that, I think today it can also play a good catalyst role, because sometimes exactly where you needed the resources are not available to take the kind of risk that philanthropy can take. It's that bridge capital, and we must recognize that it has that role to play. And it's not just the big wealthy, the middle wealthy, everyone has that role to bridge, the bridging role to play.
No, I was thinking that actually the role of philanthropy is not to give the hard values that government should give, but to rather to experiment, innovate and create models.
Yeah.
So like at Swades, what we're trying to do is create a model for development. At scale, 1 million people, 5 years, 360-degree deep intervention model, and see what are the key triggers. And we really test. I come from a media background. So we test. We're doing a huge rural aspiration study. And in fact, I looked around to find if there were any rural aspiration studies. I at least couldn't find any, because I was looking around to see if I could just borrow one instead of making ones expensive. So understand people at their depth and see what are the key triggers that can change, because we don't believe in charity, your art of giving. I mean, I have a problem with the word art and I have a problem with the word giving. It's not an art, it's an art and a science.